5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm joined as always with my boy, your boy,
our boy,
God's boy.
Hey,
Come on, Sheldon. And I'm AJ. And it's
wait. He's just gonna say he's AJ. He's not just AJ. He's who Superman wants to be. Who's Batman? Who he envies. Okay, like Justice League formed their whole league based off of AJ alone. Let's just call it what it is.
This is making up for the past like 2 episodes that you've called me special to start off. So don't think I forgot. Right?
I'm not making it up. You're still special. And that's why Justice League.
Yep, they can't emulate.
They can't emulate. Marvel wish they could. The Avengers can't avenge what AJ has done. I'm just saying.
That's true. Well, it's going to be a good one today.
Oh,
excited for this conversation. If you are listening to us throughout this year, we just want to say thanks. Thank you for joining us through this process. This is kind of our first year. If you watched our recap from,
that's the wrong button.
Soundboard that is not the right. Hey, I was like, what is he doing? But this is our like first year of really trying to be consistent with it, and so we don't usually do something like this, but we really believe in what we're doing here. And so if this conversation touches you, or you think somebody needs to hear it, share it with them.
Yes, please.
Do whatever you got to do. That's not so we can build, but we just believe in what we're doing. We think people need to hear it. So thanks for rocking with us up to this point. I mean, we're in the second month, so we did the first one. That's pretty great.
We actually did it. Like, let's talk about that real quick, because some people are listening and probably not gonna go back to how it all started. Like it started with I feel like the Lord was telling me in 2021 to use my social media influence to talk about Him and my personal life and my experience, and He's giving me influence, and that's just to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And so I did a little bit, but I was always inconsistent. I was letting life get to me. I was letting the enemy keep me from all your podcast is nobody's gonna listen to that. You're not enough. You're not all these different things.
Right.
And then come now. Fast forward a bunch of time and a bunch of healing and stuff later. Then AJ and I weren't super close for a while, and then we just guys say one joke here, one joke there. Hey, we're best friends. You know, that's how it is. That's how it goes. And then one day I just mentioned the podcast. He was like, "Wait, you mentioned the podcast?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I want to do a podcast." I was like, "I'm looking for a host." He's like, "Let me pray about it." The next day he was like, "Let's do it." I was like, "All right."
I'm down.
And that's how we started. And our biggest thing was, when we started the first time in 2023, we didn't stay consistent. We did maybe 2 in a row, and after that it was like 2 months or 3 months almost. And so when we vision planned and cast vision, and it's okay, in 2024 we do not want it to be marked by inconsistency. And so if anything wants something to grow, they have to be consistent.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're doing. Set up a time. We're gonna film every Friday. I ain't gonna lie, even before that, I was like, man, we could not film today. I'd be okay with that. But I was like, nah, we gotta do this.
I thought the same thing.
See, I can sense it, because we have such a good conversation. I was like, you know what? Let's just chill out and watch Minecraft video, bro.
It's so real. It's so real.
But I'm glad we're here. So yeah, this is what we're doing. We're being consistent, even if we don't feel like it. Discipline, baby. Holla at us.
Yeah, it's some discipline, man. I think we all need a little bit more of that in this year. But yeah, I mean, it's been a cool transition, and it's been fun to kind of do it with you. But I think that it's an interesting conversation, and maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't. But I think that obviously we want this to grow, because like I said before, we believe in it.
Right.
But I think it really comes down to like whether this grows or not, we want it to be on whether or not God wants it to.
Yeah.
Not because we didn't put the work in, And I think that's a great way to deal with things that you're passionate about, dreams. Like
that's good.
If it grows, ultimately it's going to be on God. But so many times in the scripture, God uses and Jesus uses farming parables as a way to say, like, hey, the farmer goes and they plants and they water, but they don't make it grow. That's God. And so that's the same thing with this, like we're going to keep showing up. We're going to keep sowing seeds. And really, I think we've just been really encouraged in the past couple of weeks with some of the ones that we dropped, where people have just connected with it and reached out and said something. And so both things are true, right? Like if you think somebody needs to hear it, share it with them. If you want to leave a comment on, we have comments on all of these pretty much now, but let us know if something connected with you. You know, we love to hear it. It really encourages Sheldon and I as we keep going. And the last one we filmed with my wife was a banger. So
Facts.
Go check that one out. But we're going to get into a conversation today about generational curses.
Dun, dun, dun.
And we were talking even just a little bit ago about kind of like the heavy spiritual implications of that. And so I want to be clear from the jump. Like, this isn't like some weird, like, you need to go and do these specific things, and that's how you're going to clear yourself from the...
This is not naming and claiming, brother.
No, not at all. But there is, I think, a really good conversation for people our age right now, young adults that are either, looking for potentially the person they're going to spend the rest of their life with, starting families, and you're starting to have to evaluate not only and process what you went through as a kid in a high school or in a college student, those really formative years, but also looking forward now, how do I want to live my life, and what do I want my family's culture even to be like? This is true, I think, of any parent child relationship. Is eventually the kid is going to grow up and they're going to realize, hey, I really love my parents, and there are things that they did that were awesome, and there are things that they did that I don't want to do. And I don't think that that's the picture of who's a good and bad parent. I think everybody is going to have that. But I think us talking about how to rightly look at some of those things, how to make progress. But ultimately, when we talk about generational curses in the Old Testament, like I said, just from the jump, the curse that you'll see in the Old Testament primarily is sin. Sin is when Adam and Eve, and they eat the fruit that they're not supposed to, and then everybody from that point on has to deal with sin. But in the same way that there was generational sin, there's a individual reconciliation available for everybody because of what Christ did.
Amen.
And now in the Old Testament, you'll see a couple different areas where God will talk about judging the next generations for the sins of their parents. And I think in our modern society, that is really hard to kind of wrap your head around, and I'm not going to pretend like I know how to do that. Like, it's an interesting moral question to ask, but obviously God's God and I'm not, and so that's above my pay grade in a lot of ways. But more importantly, obviously when you zoom out and you have the full scope of Christ, that's where it was always heading. But furthermore, there was something to be said about our actions having a direct correlation and effect on our kids and grandkids and lineage. And it's not just about like the legacy that you leave behind, but sometimes what you struggle with, and I think where this kind of conversation comes from, because this is something that you and I have talked about before as well, is just more to the point of, hey, how do I really know what I'm up against if I don't know what my parents were up against and their grandparents, all that kind of stuff? And having the best shot, I think, to change things. And also, as we kind of evaluate our childhood and where we came from, I think it's important to ask those questions of, hey, I might be dealing with things that my parents either couldn't, didn't have the tools to deal with, right? Because that can be true. They would not deal with it. They didn't want to. It was too much hard work.
That's the most common.
And that would be the one that I think that hurts. Not that none of these or any of these are great, but it's just true. Sometimes they don't have the tools. Sometimes they don't have the actual desire and the discipline. And so in that same way, I find myself thinking a lot before I have kids, which, probably in the next couple of years for Whitney and I, is, hey, how can I make sure that I am not punting on my responsibility just for my kids to deal with what I could have slain today?
That's a bar, yeah.
But there's a lot that goes into it. I don't want you guys to leave this conversation thinking that you have to be like a superhero in your family line. And we'll get into it, but we'll start, I think, just with a kind of an open-ended question of, we've talked a little bit about it, and so feel free to go into whatever depth you feel like. But when would you say in your life, like how old were you when you realized that there were things that was happening in your parents and their parents, and they showed up in your own life?
Well, I'm just gonna jump out the bat and say this before I get into that. Is one thing I had to first understand is that my parents aren't the reason for my problems.
That's great. Really good.
Because genuinely, like, outside of the parents that were abusive and actually negligent towards you, those are outliers. Most of the parents are genuinely were doing the best they could, right, with the tools they were given, with the knowledge they had, and they did the best they could. And so understanding, like, yes, Like, I am deeply sorry and hurt that you may have been neglected or not taken care of emotionally, physically, and all these different things. None of those things are your fault by any means, because I don't think 99% of parents wake up when it's like, I'm not going to feed my kid today.
Right. I'm
going to wake up and beat my kid today. I'm going to wake up and abuse my kid today. That's not what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Although it's not your fault, but you have a responsibility how you deal with that going forward. And so that was something that, as I kind of got closer to my parents, finding out more about their childhood and how they grew up and the things that I dealt with and the things they deal with, I was like, whoa, hold on. This is crazy that not only you deal with that, but I see it in my brothers as well, and also in me as well. I was like, okay, now what do I do with this information? So to get into it, the area that I realized that was deeply rooted in my family tree was pornography. And so it's a little backstory. If you haven't listened, I've talked about this in depth, so I'm not going to go into it in depth that much, but I've talked about it in my, I think the second part of my testimony, a little while back. I can't remember which one it is, but watch all three. Slight plug. Shout out. And as I was getting closer to my dad, it's kind of just trying to open up that channel. Okay, this is, I'm vulnerable. Like, you obviously the spiritual head of the house still, and I just want to be closer with you. So I'm opening up, and I was telling him, hey, this is all things that I'm dealing with. And to my surprise and my shock was he was saying that I'm not giving y'all a timeline because
right, don't need
that. But when he told me, he's like, yeah, like, I just recently overcame that just a few years prior. I was like, what?
Yep.
You?
Yep.
That's crazy. And then he gave me some more information. I was like, whoa, this is much deeper rooted than I realized. And in the moment, I thought about saying, you know what? It's your fault. It's your fault that I did all this. It's your fault because you didn't deal with it. I have to deal with it. And right, it's that stat that says if you grow up in a house with alcoholics, your propensity and likelihood to be an alcoholic is significantly higher than somebody who does not.
That's right.
And so, it's like the age-old question: is it nature versus nurture? Right? Do I have to change my environment? And it's because my environment, I'm not outside of this environment, I'm inside this environment. Does that make me akin to do these things? And it's something we were talking about on Sunday when we first kind of mentioned it. Yeah. And I was like, when I remember I was listening to Andy Mineo's song, and it was talking about a song called Shame. It's a beautiful song, by the way. And he was talking about how when he was 13, his mom caught him watching porn, and she was like going crazy and all this. I can't believe what my last born was dabbling in. And I started thinking about it. I was like, have my parents ever caught me? I remember my first time my dad found out that I wasn't smart as I could, browse the history, all that stuff. Right, I was in middle school. Yeah, and he saw it on the computer because we only had one laptop in the house, and so whatever, right? And so he catches me and he calls me and is like, hey, just ask, hey, what were you looking at? I was like, oh, nothing. What are you talking about?
New video games.
Because I'm thinking, I'm good.
Right.
That bad boy. This is when Google used to have your this is a long time ago. This is when Google used to have the boxes at the bottom that show the recent website what they were. Tabs, yep. And I didn't know that. And so he opened up Google. That was the first thing he saw. And so he was like, so what's this? I was like, oh, I've been found out. Well, I was looking at that and thinking, okay, from the parent to the child, I'm thinking, oh, my punishment's about to be crazy.
Right.
It wasn't that bad.
No.
It was just like, hey, you just need to not be on a computer for X amount of time.
Right.
And as I was looking back and reflecting, I was like, that makes perfect sense why I didn't probably get in more trouble and have more discipline, because there's a good chance that he was probably dealing with the same thing at the time. And it's like, well, if I have to discipline him, then I subject myself to the same discipline.
The same rule.
And so I was like, wow, okay. And so I don't even call it a battle with pornography, because the Bible's telling us to flee. Yep. Am I running away from it?
That's good.
Not by avoiding it by any means, but running to Jesus. Right. I'm telling myself, hey, I'm doing this so I can restore my relationship with the Lord and keep my eyes pure, so I can look at people the way God has intended them to. And also, I'm killing this in my family. I don't want to bring my kids into the same things, because like you said, I refuse to deal with this. This is down. So that was living the last few years of my life, coming to grips with those things. Like, okay, I'm not bringing this forward.
Yeah,
I'm not doing it. What about you?
Yeah, no, it's a great point that you make about it. I think for me, growing up, I think I felt such a security in church, because my home life was it's weird, you know, like I don't think I had a bad childhood. I don't think that I had like a horrific situation or anything like that, but I did experience some level of just like the uncertainty. There wasn't a lot of security in home, even emotionally, just because there was always in my family, I don't even think we like fight like hardcore or anything. Whitney might say that we do because she's not used to it, but there's just a tendency in my family for things to just at some point just kind of blow up, you know, and then everybody's fine and we move on, but it could just pop off at any moment. You know, that's just how it feels. And so I found a lot of security outside of the family home. And so a lot of ways I feel like I had kind of an abnormal childhood in that way. Like I don't think it was bad or anything, but a lot of those things like guidance and stuff that I looked for were in spiritual role models for me, not really my parents. Like when it came to my pornography addiction and stuff in middle school and high school, I thought about this not too long ago, but like the only discipline that I think I ever got about that was self-inflicted. Like I had come back from a camp in middle school, and I remember, it's crazy how pornography changes your brain and what it does. But I remember being at a party in 6th grade for a couple of twins, guys that were just my homies, you know, in 6th grade. And this guy that I didn't know very well just came up with the laptop and was like, hey, you got to check this out, to all of us. And I was like, what the frick is it? I don't even know what's going on. And it wasn't even, I didn't even get hooked until months later when I remembered the website. And I was like, what was that about, you know? And so I've been watching it for a couple of years. But I went to a camp maybe 7th, 8th grade. I came back and those camps are always incredible. They really just challenge you to be obedient, to take those kinds of steps, and really formative for my life. And I came back, and at the time it was on a 3DS or a regular DS. I don't even remember what it was, but it had internet access.
It had to be 3DS.
3DS then, yeah. And I didn't have a smartphone at the time. Nothing that could access that. And so 3DS, I remember bringing it to my parents and being like, I want you guys to put a passcode on this. I had been struggling with this, and I don't want it in my life anymore. And I remember my mom and dad, my dad primarily just being so like proud, yes, but honestly like stunned a little bit when I look back of just like, why is my middle schooler coming to me asking for me to put boundaries on things, you know? But I really believed what my pastor said about it. You know, I really believed it was dangerous. And so, you know, come to find out, like, some of the things in my family unit, at least, is pornography runs in it, you know, like my brothers have struggled with it and all those kinds of things. And it was never talked about. Like we never really
taboo,
dived into it. And I get it, because maybe at that point you're kind of experienced, you're right in the middle when we were growing up of the transition from like internet has arrived to like internet is everything. And so navigating that must have been crazy, because you know the stats show us now you need to talk to your kids about it earlier than you think you do,
right?
Because it'll find them earlier than you think it will.
Like, isn't the stat like 10 or 9,
if that?
Maybe 8. I think it's actually to 8 or 9.
I'm sure
average exposure to pornography is like 8 or 9, which is nuts.
And even if that's like it's that is not an outlier age. You know, there will be several 8-year-olds here in 10 years that'll be like, yeah, I found out when, you know, whatever. But there are also some other things. You know, I think alcoholism, not even in. So all of my siblings, we don't all have the same dad. You know, me and my sister, my younger sister, have the same dad and mom. We all share the same mom. But there were some divorces that both of them had kind of gone through. And so it was just more this idea of, I think as parents, or as my parents, should I say, there's just kind of this desire to not have your kids deal with what you dealt with. But as I've grown up and I've learned and I've dove into cycles and trauma and what that does, you know, in good conversations with my wife and other people that have kind of experienced what we would call like just straight up abuse in those situations, is that unless you take the work and you do the work, you are doomed to repeat the cycle. Yeah. And so it's in some ways, you know, we're going to call it a family tree, a family line. But I think the image that comes to mind is a river. And a river that starts up like in a mountain, so to say, and it just flows downhill. And that's as you go down the river, you go down the generations. Eventually things are going to get carried with you, and you're going to start going down a path because somebody made a choice to change where it was flowing. And the right path might mean that you have to go back up and go somewhere else. Yeah. And so what that means, though, is that the entire flow of your family is going one direction until somebody decides,
I'm going to change.
I'm not going this way anymore.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I used to think about my pornography mostly and how it would affect my wife and myself. More recently, even as I try to now, like, in a lot of ways, desexualize my brain,
right,
my eyes, and how I think about things, it's so much more of like, oh my gosh, I want to make sure I am able to take care of everything that I can before I pass this on to my kid. Because for better or for worse, me and Whitney are going to be their example. That's what they're going to know.
Right.
So as much as we want to say, we'll just get them to pick up the good parts of us. But you're not good all the time. Right. So the thing that you walk away with too, the thing that you are holding on to, they will find. And I think in a lot of ways, it just kind of becomes a conversation of, potentially what both of us are saying is, it would have been more helpful, in our opinions, to at least have a dialogue about it.
Right.
A conversation about it. If my dad would have came to me, when I was younger and going through that and saying things like, hey, I went through this and here's what it cost me. And here's why I don't want it for you. I feel like at least I would have had a better shot of dealing with that and fighting that than I did. Now, once again, I think we're kind of venturing into some territory where, like you were saying earlier, certainly this isn't every parent. Right. Like there are situations, and if you had a situation where there was abuse, our heart goes out to you. We're terribly sorry to hear about that. And it's not right. And also you have situations where I think a fascinating thing to start even thinking about is really, as we kind of see like a really diverse country that we live in America, and there's immigrants and all these kinds of things, like the further away you get from the people in your family that came over here first, like the cushier life gets, like the easier in some ways, we would say. Like when I go back to my dad's parents who were living during the Great Depression, and I'm like, bro, I would have hated to have your parents. Well, it was a different time. Right. It was a different time. And as you get, I think, more generations removed from just surviving, then we can afford to have some of the conversations to knock it down. But I think ultimately the point we're getting at here is that there are things that are in your history, in your like lineage, so to say, that you're carrying with you, and maybe you're aware of them now and maybe you're not. But they will continue to go down the lineage until somebody is willing to step up and to say, no more. This ends with me. In that way, I think what I need to be very clear and important is that what we're not talking about is that somebody needs to finally be strong enough to finish off and slay the giant. Right. That's not the gospel. That's not Christianity. Yeah. But I do believe that God is constantly looking. It was the verse I brought up, and I'll go ahead and go to it now. But it's in 2 Chronicles 16:9. It's one of my favorite verses. But it says, "The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him." And so the picture that you get is not so much that God is waiting for somebody to be strong enough and worthy enough for Him to be like, "Well, I can do something with it." Your father I couldn't, your grandfather I couldn't, but you're strong. It's literally to say that God is wanting to do something all the time, but He's waiting for somebody who's willing to do it His way. And He's willing to wait on that because it's what's best for us. And so I think more of it becomes, hey, how do we become people that are walking in step with God? Because ultimately that means we're going to see when things are wrong. Because we're going to know, walking with God, we're going to see what's not good. And on the other hand, who is going to be humble enough and willing to say, dude, maybe alcoholism for one of our listeners is something that has been like 3 generations deep and well documented. Maybe you had people with addictions that struggle with it, people who lost their lives. Maybe it's like in your blood. Right. The thing I want to tell you is that you can change it. Right. It's okay. Now, that it might not mean that you're able to ever have like a casual drink. Right. That might never be something that's good for you. Right. But it does mean you can change the trajectory, and God isn't willing for you or waiting for you to be perfect to do it. He just wants you to be willing to submit yourself to Him and do it His way. I think about it like just saying, hey, God, I want to change the path that my kids are on and the path that I've been on and my family has been on for years and decades and decades and decades. And him just saying like, well, I've asked every one of them and I've given them all the opportunity. I think all that separates it out is people who take God up on the offer.
Yeah.
But you got to do it his way.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah. And there's two things that I want to kind of touch on, but since this one is fresh, like doing it his way. I think it's safe to be said when it comes to straight sin, not just bad habits, because all bad habits aren't sin.
Yeah,
right. I can have a bad habit of not putting my clothes in the washer.
Right.
When I should be doing my hamper, that's not a sin. Right. Now, when it comes to the matter of sin, a lot of us have fallen in the place of sin management instead of actually wanting to be free from that.
Yeah.
And that is something that I had to take that big old fat slice of humble pie.
Yep.
And eat that up. Like, man, if I really truly wanted to be free, freedom is already at the door waiting for me to accept it. Like you said, I have to do it his way.
It's good.
And I don't like when people say that, oh, Christianity is self-help or the Bible is the best self-help book in the world. Yeah, sure, if you just take it for its wisdom, it can be self-help, but it's not going to produce anything, truly, unless you put your life on the line with Jesus. And it's not about us. He didn't die for us to become better. He died for us to become new. And that's why, like, I'm starting to fully understand, like, the old has passed away, the new has come. Yeah. Okay, what does that mean? If the old has passed away, the new has come, does that mean all of my problems went away all of a sudden? No. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that the power that those problems had is no longer. But now you have to do things my way so they can stay that way.
That's good.
The second you go back to the old life, those old problems are going to start to control you. It's going to start to pull you away from my plan. And that's when you're going to start to have all these different power struggles, right? I can't have two masters. I can't have it one way. I can't be on this side of the fence and be on this side of the fence. I can't be hot or be cold. Hey, be hot or only be cold. Live in the middle is miserable. All right. And as I've been, like, last month, I was going through Colossians the whole month. And I was really honing in on chapter 3, where it's talking about put on a new self. Like, obviously Paul wrote Colossians, and you would see the same thing. He's talking about a lot of Colossians was referenced in Ephesians as well. And so he's setting up the preeminence of Christ in the chapter before and why you're able to put on a new self and let the old die. And a question that I found myself asking, like, God, how do I actually put my old self to death? Right? And it's the same, like, mental question I ask of, okay, when it comes to pornography, for example, was I free the day that I asked God for forgiveness and truly changed my mind to repent? It's like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, or I'm doing whatever I need to do to go from that. Was I free then? Or was I free the day a long time ago? Right. When was that freedom for me? Was I free way back, or was it free when I noticed it? I think that's a fine difference, but it's telling me to put to death, like in verse 5, chapter 3, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in us, right? It lists sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a word.
Which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. And then the rest of the chapter has a few more, do not put off this, but the part that really comes on is, okay, now I have to put on these characteristics, like you said, I have to do it his way. Once I put to death my flesh and all the things of it, in order for it to stay dead, I have to keep on and put on the characteristics of Christ, right? Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, and so also must forgive. And above all of these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And then he goes on to say, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, in which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another as encouraging, in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts of God. And whatever you do, it ends up this section, whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And in that, I wrote in my Bible, it was you have to open up. I have to open up and allow him to, okay, this you want to be close to me, and because you want to be close to me, I have to call these things out of you. Because if God is holy and we are not, if God is separated, holy means set apart.
Yeah.
And if he wants to be close to me, he cannot be like in the same. He cannot be with sin. He by his nature, he cannot be with sin. And so when he gets close to us, and the sin is like, oh wait, like he's pushing against that. Am I gonna allow God in to squeeze that sin out and to work something better in, or am I gonna just be resistant and like, you know what? Nah, God, move. And God is so gracious and so merciful. He will even let us push him away, but it doesn't mean he's not gonna stop trying. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is like, as I truly want to become more like Jesus, I really think you have to really count the cost of, like, you know, if you really want to be like Jesus, you really have to die.
You do.
To a lot of things.
Yeah.
And dying to those things, it's not easy, but I can tell you it's worth it. And I'm just like, man, okay, I get it. It's like, do you think it was convenient for Jesus to go on the cross? No, nothing was convenient about that. Nothing's convenient about really showing love. Nothing's convenient about really being patient. Nothing's convenient about really taking stock of where you are and being honest with yourself and, okay, God, this is where I'm at. But he can work with that if I'm not in denial. And granted, he can work through that denial, but he wants you to humble yourself by, hey, God, this is what I'm dealing with. Can you help me with that? Yeah. And I think that speaks a lot to what you were saying before. Like, if I am thinking about these things that I'm struggling with, like right now, what something the Lord's been leading me through is working on my pride, man, working on humility. Do I want my kids to have the same pride that I have, knowing how much that separates me from the will of God in my life? Do I want that for them? No. Do I want them to be impatient? No. Do I want them to be judgmental? No. It's always good to know what somebody else should do or should not do. When it comes to ourselves, why all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, it's okay. Like, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when we talk about kind of these sins or things that follow us through our lines, I think one of the things I have to go back to is always, in the Old Testament a lot, and even in the New Testament, but mostly in the Old, God is known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Now, anybody who has read the Bible knows that's a wild three people to pick. And wild in the sense that they're not perfect. So God is choosing to work through people that aren't perfect.
Right.
But their legacy that they passed down was of listening to the voice of God and being obedient. And some parents just pass down the bad stuff. Some parents just pass down, or mostly the legacy they leave behind is a majority of the addiction, or some, because they don't do the work. It's important to note. I mean, you can see it in Genesis in the first couple chapters, but around 10 to 15, or whenever, I think Abraham picks up in like 11 or something like that. But like chapter 12 or something like that, he's lying to Pharaoh about his wife being his sister. Because he always like, if they see how beautiful she is,
they're going to marry her.
They're going to want to marry. They might kill me to get her.
Yeah.
And so he goes and tells Pharaoh, oh, no, that's my sister. Pharaoh, obviously very interested in Sarai at the time. And then come to find out, God, send some punishment, plague, something like that, right? And so
and Pharaoh's like,
why'd you set me up, bro?
Yeah.
Why did you set me up? And he's like, I was scared, Then you go down a couple chapters, and Isaac pulls the same stunt. Now, like father, like son. There's something to be said about, Abraham has no idea what he's choosing to do in that moment would then be repeated. And so that's an important distinction to know. The choices you make today might be repeated by your kids.
Right.
So have that conscious awareness about it. And then obviously we get to Jacob, and that's scandalous in itself, because it should be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But it's not, because Jacob lied and he tricked his brother, tricked his father. So like the gods of the patriarchs, right? The three of the most famous individuals in the Old Testament are all profoundly broken. And that's the only kind of humans you're going to find,
right?
Are profoundly broken people. But the legacy they passed on, right, is, what does Abraham say about him? He believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So we're not saying that you have to be a perfect person.
Right.
And certainly it doesn't mean that you have to take care of everything perfectly before you're able to have kids.
Right.
Ultimately, you're a profoundly broken person,
right,
just like anyone else.
Right.
But the legacy they left behind was that, come hell or high water, what God says goes. We're going to follow him.
Right.
And so ultimately, like the piece you're hitting on is
perhaps it's passing a bigger legacy of humility and obedience to say, man, I saw my parents mess up, but I saw them apologize. I saw them choose to be better. I saw them choose to follow God's will no matter what. And that's so powerful, because ultimately, I think that if I would have heard this, a couple years ago, I would just be thinking like, you're right. Like, I just got to get to work right now and I got to do it. And I just don't find Jesus in a lot of those moments where we think we have to power up.
Right.
I think ultimately a lot of what we're talking about is sanctification in a way. But it's just choosing to finish the work of sanctification where maybe some people in our family trees stopped early.
Right.
And I don't think it's because we're special. I think it's because we're willing to let God have his way. And because of that, I think the breakdown that was explained to me about sanctification and justification and stuff, right, is that when Christ died for our sins, he saved us from the penalty of our sins. Okay? As we get sanctified and we're living out and becoming more like him, we are being saved from the power of sin until we die and go to heaven, where we'll be saved from the presence of sin. It'll be gone.
Yeah. Threefold.
Right. So when you look at it that way, you are never going to be free from the presence of sin on this earth.
Right.
So there will always be things in your history, in your blood, that are not right.
Right.
And that's okay, because you're just like everybody else.
Right.
But I think we can all point to maybe even ourselves, probably, and maybe people in our family that stopped short of what God was asking them to do and what he was maybe offering. I think one of those things that comes up, and it's a really quick passage, but Abram was not the first person to pick up his family and move. It was actually his father. His father, they were living in the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, as you are. It's a really weird name. But he picks up his family and moves them, and then it says he settles. He settles, and then we see God call Abram out to the land. Now, I'm not saying that God messed up. I am saying, though, isn't it interesting that the dad picks up and starts to move, and the word is then he chooses to settle somewhere else, and then God calls the son. In some ways, your parents might have settled before they got to where God wanted them to go. And that doesn't mean they're horrific people and we need to just like shame them and judge them, because ultimately, as unfair as it is, it might not be your fault that something happened, but now it is your responsibility on how you handle it.
Right.
And I'm sorry, like that's just how it is. It's I wish that we weren't held accountable for those kinds of things. But then I think the question becomes, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to let God finish the work, not just start it? Are you going to let him finish it to completion before you then go and punt on your responsibility? I think one of the most heartbreaking things for a parent is probably watching themselves and their kid get it wrong, even when they've already made the mistakes and they want to be able to pass on that knowledge. Ultimately, your kid's going to make mistakes. And because you're around them, it's probably going to be like, you made mistakes. But I think that there's something to be said about, we all want our pain to be worth something in the end. We want it to achieve something. And so I just think there's a certain awareness of understanding, like, the things that you struggle with aren't just about you. It's also going to be about your spouse. It's also going to be about your family. It's also going to be about their kids one day. And so the more work that we can do, the further we can advance the ball down the field. I'm telling you, I think a lot of people preach or talk about this message as a way of being like, really focusing on the curses. But the greatest curse in human history was undone by one person. One person. It got the rest of us, but one person through the second Adam, we now have healing and reconciliation and all of that. And I think in a way, that's also a picture of what we can do for our own lives whenever we submit to God's will for our life. And saying, you know what, my great grandfather was an alcoholic, or maybe cheated on his spouse, infidelity. My grandfather did the same thing. My father did the same thing, but not me. Not me.
That's
and you know what?
House,
that's not sometimes the solution isn't a sexy one. It's not a really great spiritual one. It's not like I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to meditate until God opens up the heavens and then I'm free. Sometimes it might look like going to therapy.
Ooh, that's a big one. Talk to it.
Like, because maybe your parents weren't willing to go. Maybe they didn't know they could. Like, the older you get, the more you realize, like, you start hitting those milestones of, like, I'm the same age as my parents whenever they were doing this. And you're like, none of us know what we're doing. Not a single one of us, but you just happen to be in a position where you're responsible for me. And I can't imagine, as not having kids, I don't get it. Okay? It's hard to wrap my head around. But I think ultimately, like, the beauty of the gospel in a lot of ways is that, like, you get to be as close to God as you want to be. That's also sobering. Because a lot of us might say, well, I'm not as close to God as I want to be. Well, hold on now. God always makes himself available. Now, of course, that's not a promise you're always going to feel what you want to feel. But God is always available to us. And so, just like so many other things, this sanctification, what is it? I mean, Preston Morrison in the Leader's Cut, right? Shout out to him. But his whole theme around it, like the central message is...
Just to get cut by God.
Is the wording that he uses, the Holy Spirit told him, as much as you want me to work through you, you have to let me cut off you. Yeah. So the idea is, if we are marbles being chipped and made into a great statue, the thing is that, oh my gosh, PC, our pastor, one of the first weeks that we checked out United City, because we're coming up maybe on a year of joining here in like some weeks. One of the first times I ever heard him preach, he said one of the most metal bars I've ever heard in my life, and it haunts me in my sleep, dude. I'm telling you. But he said, he was talking about being a living sacrifice, and he said, the problem with a living sacrifice is that it can crawl off the altar. And I about like lost it right there, because the picture he's painting is like when Michelangelo is working on a marble statue, the marble's not going to move. Right. It's not going to move. It's going to stay still until completion. And then when the work is done, everybody's like, wow, that's incredible. But if the marble was alive and got too uncomfortable and left before the work was done, in a lot of ways, it might sound harsh, that marvelous statue becomes like a deformed abomination, because the full vision hasn't been figured out yet.
It's half done.
So it doesn't mean that, like, if you're not perfect, you're an abomination. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, what you and I have to worry about is that when things get uncomfortable, we have a tendency as humans to bail. But I'm telling you, it is way more important and good for you to wait until he's done. Yeah. Just wait till he's finished, because you'll see the finished product, and it will be everything and more than what you thought it would be. But I think it comes back to just idea of making sure what you pass down to your kids is not just what you inherited from your parents. Man, can we take some step forwards? Can we move the ball? Can we push it up the court a little bit? Right. That's not easy, but I am telling you that you're starting where your parents left off. It's a relay race. Just move it forward. Run hard while it's your turn to run. But I'm telling you, that means being committed to doing the work. And it might look like the therapy. It might look like community. It might look like the things that your parents didn't have access to or didn't want any part of, which means that you're going to be going up against the current, and your parents, your family might be like, why are you doing that? Why do you have to do that? That's crazy. That's too far. All this kind of stuff. And it's like, no. Because I don't want my kids to have to deal with what was my fault. Yeah. I don't want to deal with it. We love to glorify David and taking on Goliath, as we should. But the tragedy is it should have been Saul.
People forget that.
It should have been Saul. And he was afraid. So if my son goes on to slay giants, praise God.
Amen.
But if it's the one I should have done, and I didn't trust God for it, that's a tragedy of my life.
And the crazy thing about that, you look even before that, who was supposed to take them to the promised land? Moses. But who ended up taking them? Joshua.
Not Moses.
I'm just like, yo. And like you're saying so many good things, and James 1 just popped up. Right? James 1, if you have not read it, is one of those scriptures, I mean, all scripture is applicable all the time. But this chapter, I think you can apply almost every second, every day.
James, for reference, James is like the spiritual jump. What I mean is that James is the book of the Bible that's going to take you in a dark alley and beat you up. and just haymakers left and right. You'd be like, oh, ow. And he's like, it's for your good, though.
Yeah, it's for your good.
James,
you're going to be like, yeah.
He don't pull punches.
It hurts, but if it hurts so good, you know? So James 1 says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let that steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect, complete, lacking in nothing. And as you're talking about like moving this ball forward, just whatever that be, an inch or a mile or a state, whatever that might look like, whatever that trial may be for whatever God is calling you to, maybe it is therapy, right? Maybe it is getting more in tune with your emotional side and having those difficult conversations and being bold enough to talk about them, because a lot of times I think people don't talk about the struggles that they have with their kids because they think if I talk about it, then that makes them going to make them curious to do it.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce them to it.
And just a quick story from personal life where I don't think that's true is because growing up, I never heard no messages talked about pornography at all. None, not one. I didn't hear churches start talking about pornography until I was maybe 21. Right, that's 21 years. The place that I'm at, like a lot. My dad was a preacher. I was there a lot. You know how many messages I heard about not having sex before marriage? Too many to count. And because I heard all those messages, I was terrified. I'm like, I'm not doing this. No way I can do this. There's no way I can do this. Because I'm thinking, granted, a little bit of it was out of fear, right? Sure. Because, I mean, I'm like, how could I take care of a kid? But I don't even know I'm wearing to school tomorrow. Like, what the heck?
I can't take care of me.
Right, stuff like that. But that has all that foundation that was laid there. Always, I had to play it in the back of my head. Like, wait, hold up. I always had to come to terms with it. Now I understand. Obviously, the reason why, because God said so. And the reason He said so, not just because He said so, which is valid in itself,
right?
But the implications and the hurt and the pain and the dysfunction that comes from that. Now I get that. If I would have had that same type of realization back then, man, how much different would my life be? How much different would my perspective be? But at the end of the day, when I read James, yes, I hate that I was exposed at such a young age, and I struggled with that for half my life. And and like you said, how much it changes. But man, can I count it all joy, because I know that the trials that I'm going to go through, not because of this, but any trial that I have, whatever it's going to look like, the testing of my faith will produce something. What is that? And that's steadfast, and I'm going to be faithful and do the things that God has called me to do. And it's going to have its full effect. I like that, like those two words, its full effect. Right? How you're saying, like, you know, they had the opportunity to really go through it all, to be obedient to the end, but that wasn't the full effect.
Right.
That was part of it. So that you may be perfect. And when it says perfect, it does not mean perfect as in 100%. It means mature.
It's good. It's really good.
Like, it means mature and complete, lacking in nothing. And so with that, I'm just, you know what? This is what I gotta do. I'm gonna do it. And I was reading this book called The Awe of God by John Bevere. And he was talking about I think it was 4 or 5 pillars of obedience. Yeah. And when I read them, I was like, I never heard obedience talked about in this way. And it was like, obey when it doesn't make sense. Obey when there's no personal benefit. That's a big one. Obey when it hurts.
Yeah.
And it's like, and obey to completion. And I was like, a lot of my life was defined by half obedience, which is disobedience at the end of the day. Yeah. Because if God told me to run a mile and I did great running 3/4 of that, He told me to run a mile, not
I didn't do what He said. Yeah.
And so, all right.
Right.
It's all right. You still have a chance. Finish. Yeah. Finish the race.
Yeah. Do what I said.
Finish the race, and then we're gonna go to the next thing. But yeah, I know you got something you want to read, but
yeah, it's really good. I mean, it just made me think of Philippians 1:6. You know, sometimes we just paraphrase some scriptures, but I think sometimes it's good to provide backing or at least things that you can go check out yourself and read into. But what it says is, "For I am confident of this very thing, that He who began a good work among you will complete it by the day of Christ Jesus." Obviously, this is not a passage that's like directly talking about what we're talking about right now, and that's important to know. You know, context is everything. But the point is that, like, I don't think you're going to be held accountable for what you weren't able to do because you didn't have the tools. but I think you will be held accountable for what you had the tools for, but not the desire to change. Like, I don't think my dad is going to be in trouble for him not, being able to communicate based off of the way that he saw his parents. But there is a certain level where the accountability starts with what the tools that you did have. And so we're not saying that after you, sin is eradicated in your bloodline.
Yeah, don't be foolish.
But I will say that when you stand before God, and before that, when you're standing in front of your kids and their circumstances and their disappointments are playing out, or their consequences, you will have to have accountability for what you had the tools for, but not the heart. You didn't have the desire to push it forward. And just like anything else we talked about, we hit it last week, or last episode we dropped with Whitney, just about the things that you want to have in life take work. It's hard. It's difficult. That's why the Bible stresses so much community, is we need people to do it alongside of. But I just don't want to be said about me. I don't want it to be said about Whitney and I as parents, that when our kids grow up, they're going to say, well, you know what? They loved me, but they didn't love me enough to take care of what they could take care of. They passed it on to me. And obviously no kid is really going to do that. Like, you can still be a great parent and still be flawed. Those are the only ones that exist. But I think I don't know, my heart just breaks thinking about throwing my kid into a ring that was for me, and I wasn't willing, and I chickened out, and I ran away.
Right.
I mean, like, the Bible, it does not shy away from people who also disobey God and miss out on being a part of the story. I mean, it is, we mentioned it earlier, but Saul's whole thing was he stopped believing in God. Not like real, but he just started to put his faith somewhere else. He just turned away from what was good and right. And David, this is why there's a stark contrast, is it says David was a man after God's own heart. What does that mean? That means he's a profoundly flawed human being that really trusts God to do the best. And so at the end of the day, when you talk about those things, because listen, dude, you go to David. Even David, what is he? He goes and he commits adultery with somebody else's wife, and then he sends the husband off to die in battle, and then has a kid. I'm pretty sure that kid dies.
Yeah, the kid dies, yeah.
But then later on in his lineage, he has a kid that tries to overthrow him. So there are consequences that are going to be attached to the things that we do and don't do, right? But I just think that there's something to be said to maybe the 20-some-year-old that's listening, that's just like, hey, it might be lonely, and it will be difficult to go against the current. But if not you, then we're just going to have to hope that your kid will, or that their kids will. But this is the beauty of the generation model, is that if you make a choice, just you, from that point on,
right, the
trajectory is different forever. Forever. And of course, right? Does that mean that your kids are going to do everything you want them to do? They're going to carry it? Of course, but the point being, man, the power that you hold, if you're willing to humble yourself and say, God, I want you to use me to change the story of my family. Some of you guys might have even inherited a great story. That's awesome. Your job is going to be to continue to cultivate that, right? To continue to teach that, to lead your kids in the way that they should go. But when we talk about, these big lofty ideas, I just don't want us to undersell what God can do through one person who's willing to say, I don't care what it's going to cost me. I don't care how much it's going to hurt me. I trust that your hands will craft a better path for my family tree than mine ever could. And so I am letting you use me in however you see fit. And if that's the legacy you pass down, dude, it's not just about behavior modification like you were talking about. But if I can pass down primarily a heart that says, man, not my will, but your will, God.
As soon as you were saying that, I was just thinking about, like, as we say this, y'all have to understand that the model is Jesus.
It is.
The model is Jesus, like you said, and the Garden of Gethsemane. This man has so much anxiety about going to the cross. He sweat blood.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy. To be gripped with the weight that he's carrying, not only the sin of his time, but all the sin ever.
Yep.
Ever. In that moment, in his humanity, that's deity, he's still like, let this cup pass, but like you said, let your will be done.
Yep.
And as you talk about him just going against the grain, but I have this mental picture. I just had this mental picture that's popped up. As he's going against the grain, I just see this mass group of people walking one way, right? Mass group of people walking one way, and it's the sun behind them, like the actual sun, and it's shining at the back of those people's heads, so you can't see their faces. But all you see brushing up against him, moving him, and making them stumble is Jesus carrying that cross through all the crowd of people, going against the grain of the culture, going against the grain of everything. And then finally he gets to the end, it's like, I made it. And even him saying, I made it, still one of the most difficult, most gruesome, most brutal deaths ever known to man. To go on that cross, take the shame, take the lashes, take the disrespect, all those things for you and I, because guess what? He loved us that much. And not the fact that he loved us that much, but he also saw that the Father's will was greater than his own. Like that speaks to so many different things. So if, like you said, if you were listening to this and you're wondering, okay, what is my next step? Like AJ said, your next step is not to go slay every dragon that you know is in your family tree, because you actually might not be equipped to do that right now. Not saying you won't ever, but you might not be equipped to do that. You might be in over your head. So just take a step back.
You will be in over your head.
Like take a step back and just simply humble yourself and allow the Lord to lead you where he needs you to be. And your step could only be, hey, maybe I'm laying a foundation of this legacy that I want to build. Of I'm being open and honest with my struggles.
Yeah,
that's it. That could be your whole plan, and then he will use somebody else in your family. It don't even have to be your own kids. It could be your cousin, your brother, your sister, whoever, to help push that goal forward. And it's like, I just see how God just orchestrated. I used to use this illustration all the time in college. I feel like we're all in this big great spider web, and right in the center is usually where the spider lives, and that's God, and everything is connected to that center. If you take a spider web and you cut the center, the rest of the web falls off. Like you can clip away at the outside, but as long as the center is intact, it's good. If God is in the center and all these different connections, all these webs and all these things are affected by that, then if you get in the center with him, when things start to get cut off, when things start to go missing, when things start to get burned, when things start to get messy and flies go into it and all these different people try to get into that, guess what? They get caught in that. And they have to come in contact with the thing that's producing that is God. If I'm outside of God's center with all those different things, those things can get me. I get tangled up with those things. Oof. You get tangled up. Oof, my God. You can mess around and get tangled up with those things. Good. But if I stay in the center with him, I have nothing else to worry about. I mean, truly, I have nothing else to worry about. But yet, like you were saying, we're so incredibly flawed and broken. I mean, that's something that once you come to understand that everybody is flawed and broken, that, like you said, none of us know what we're doing. I think that's so powerful and pivotal that we don't know what we're doing.
That's right.
Because that allows me to actually have faith and trust in God. And God's like, okay, I know you don't know what you're doing. Now you know you don't know what you're doing. Now how about you take on to me who knows what you are going to do and what you should be doing, and I have the result on the other end of that. I'm not going to show you what the result is, because if I show you how you get there, you're not going to want to do it. Quite frankly.
That's right.
But as you walk with him, as you talk with him, as you grow with him, as you cry with him, as you be frustrated with him, as you be disappointed with him, all these different things, as long as you're doing it with him, you're right exactly where you need to be.
It's good.
And so,
I mean, I think, as we wrap up, I think there's an extra slice of humble pie here that not everybody's going to need. But I think when I was that age, and even now, I need to be reminded of it. I think humility makes sense to us whenever we're talking about God knowing better than us. Because I think there's a part of my brain that's like, yeah, of course God knows better than us. God. Like he's God. Like all that kind of stuff. I think the extra slice comes in when you understand that potentially the reason that you're dealing with what you're dealing with is because people tried to pretend like they knew what was going on.
And if you do that as well, you will continue the cycle. And where the humility, I think, gets me the most is coming back to saying not just God knows better than I do, but left to my own devices, I might like to think I'm more mature. I am just like everyone that came in my family before me. I have to humble myself to understand that if I go and try to take on that dragon, it's going to eat me like it did everybody else in my family. I am no better than them. That's the humility that has to come down. Not that God can handle it, and obviously he can't because he's stronger than me. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God. But it's I think sometimes there's a kind of a pride that sneaks in when we talk about our parents and what they did for us, and maybe where they weren't perfect and all that kind of stuff. And we prop ourselves up as being like the next best version of that. And I think it's just like that's how perhaps the cycle got started in the beginning. Is because they weren't willing to say they couldn't do it. And what I mean, it's a famous quote in history, right? But I think it applies. Those who forget
are doomed to repeat.
Are doomed to repeat. Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat the past. To repeat. That's probably not the actual quote, but those who forget. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but
essentially history repeats itself.
Yeah.
If you don't, because okay, let's talk about that real quick. I know we want to wrap up, but let's talk about that real quick. You can find that quote.
I'm gonna
talk about that real quick. And so, what you were saying though, I was actually I like to read, y'all. Like I read a lot of books. This book I'm reading is called Mind Shift by Erwin McManus, and the chapter I actually read yesterday the title was "No One Knows What They're Doing," and it was so comforting reading that. Like I was in my office like going nuts over some of the things he was saying. Like it's more dangerous for a person to think they know everything. They know everything to do the job that they have. It's more dangerous to be in there because it usually comes to find out that that's the person that ends up worse off than somebody that knew they're not qualified to do what they were doing. But that left them open to learn, understand, and to grow. And they had a much, much higher ceiling to succeed and be successful at whatever it is they were doing. Like that same principle, I think you'd be taken to the same thing in the spirit. Right? I know I can't do anything outside of God's will and his power, but yet I still try to do it. In my pride, I would say, hey, I know what's best for Sheldon. I know what Sheldon likes. I know what Sheldon needs. I know what Sheldon needs to be protected from. But I'm telling you how to do it in my power.
That's right.
Right? It's like if David tried to go slay Goliath outside of God's power, that whole army would have been for them. They would have lost the bet.
Yeah, they would have lost.
But he bet on the one who don't lose bets.
That's right.
So let me go all in and bet on him because I know he don't lose. He don't lose. And not only does he not lose, I think it's something you said or Josh said. I can't remember who said it. Not only does he not lose, he wins by a landslide. It's never close.
It's not close.
It's never close. It's always a blowout. There's no mercy rule when it comes to God. He was like, I'm gonna keep telling them.
You're gonna run up the score.
It's 900 billion to 0 instead of the first inning. Like,
Literally, the point is that like the whole Bible kind of like builds to this giant like good and evil, and because we're so accustomed to our entertainment and movies, we expect it to be really dramatic, and then the hero's going to overcome, even though it might look close for a little bit. The actual story of how it goes down in Revelation is that all of the armies kind of show up. And then it's done.
They're done.
They're just, you're done.
You're done.
Exploded, smited, you're done. Yeah. It's not close. The quote, there's two of them. I think it's probably one of those things that's been repackaged over time. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Winston Churchill, I think, took that. And those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
I guess the second one is the one I heard the most.
Yeah, probably. But that's the point. The point is that perhaps we got to this position because we were coming from a line of people that refused to learn from the past.
And then let's take that. As you read through the Old Testament, why do you think God had them remember so many things? Hey, remember this, make this memorial stone here. I need you to remember what I did back then because you're doomed to repeat if you don't remember. And it's so crazy. It's part of our human condition to forget all of the good that God has done and focus on all the things that he quote unquote did not do or all the bad he allowed us to go through. I wish you could see me what I'm doing right now. I'm putting everything in air quotes.
Yes.
So it's like, oh bro, like yes, I have to remember these things, and so I can learn from what they're doing, like you just said.
Yep.
And take that and grow with that and walk that path. I'm just like, yeah, bro.
Yep. It was good. It was good. You know, this is, I think, in all humility and honesty, I think this is a topic that we are trying to breach, you know, for the first time in our lives, really. And
we're
so,
not
like,
experts.
When you start listening to people that are 40 years old and have gone through the work, and they can actually tell you some of the specifics of what it's going to look like and feel like, we can't. I don't know all of I don't know how these things end up. I don't know what it's like to take a step towards healing potentially for your generational trauma or stuff like that. Like, I know what I want to do with it, and I know that I'm actively kind of taking steps, but I'm not on the other side by any means. And so we don't know everything about it.
Right.
But I do think that it's important for even people that want to do what's right. We want to take steps forward to start having conversations about these kinds of things. I think one of the weirdest things and one of the greatest things we've seen in our life, in our friend groups, is that I don't know if it's the age, I don't know if it's the people being around, maybe we're just all rubbing off on each other's shoulders, but it's almost like everybody just kind of like collectively decided we're going to start getting our stuff together. You know, like whether it was like working out with something.
Bro, yes.
People been working out all of a sudden.
Yes.
People just kind of taking their walk seriously. A lot of us are going through the Bible in a year this year, and we didn't like coordinate and plan. It just like all happened organically.
Yeah, God's orchestrating that like crazy, bro. Like that's nuts, bro.
Yep.
And
that'll be another episode.
Another episode as we unfold that and we look back. But I think it's something to be fun though. Once you look back at this episode, 10, 15 years down the road, it's like, man, I'm glad we did the work. Or I pray to God this doesn't happen. Dang, there's still more work to be done.
Yeah.
And that's very real. It's awesome. But I do want us to also quickly talk about just we talk about the generational curse, but imagine the generational blessings that come from you deciding, okay, God, I want to put in the work with you. Yeah. Like, what can be passed down? Like, I'm looking at my own family, like the generation of preachers that came around and what that looks like, the generation of faith that was laid on, the generational blessing of what it looks like to have a strong prayer life and all these different things, and not to walk in certain things because of the prayers of your great grandfather that were passed down to your great grandfather, that passed to your great grandfather, to your father's father, then to your dad, now it's to you. Like, a lot of us don't realize how many prayers were prayed years before we were ever thought of that we're living in now.
That's good.
And just to add a super zoomed out thing. Yeah. These are things that the Holy Spirit and Jesus were praying about right now. Been praying about since eternity. Since before you were thought of, before you were formed, while He was forming in your mother's womb, He's like, hey, you have come to the kingdom for such time as this. That's right. This is exactly where I want you to be. And so wherever you are, wherever you find yourself at, on where you feel like you're on the good side, okay, I'm working on these things, or you find yourself, being convicted, say, hey, maybe is work I need to be doing, or maybe you're in a place where you're like, I don't know if there's any work to do, but God, I'm open to it. Yeah. That one right there, you be careful what you pray now, because He gonna show you. He gonna show you. But regardless of where you find yourself, count it as a blessing that it is, that the God of the universe has already have a plan for you. Yeah. He's already thought about you, and He already has a solution for you. And so that's it. That's it. And this has been Lessons and Blessings. It's your boy Shell. Your boy AJ. And we're going to see y'all for another episode. Peace. Peace.